Welcome everyone. This is the 30-day novel NaNoWriMo series of videos. This video is intended to help you prepare for day 2 of National Novel Writing Month, or day 2 anytime you want to do a writing marathon and write a novel in 30 days. My name is Lynn Johnston and I blog at writesmarternotharder.com. In day 1 we talked about introducing your character, introducing the setting that your character exists in, introducing some sort of conflict to get the story started. Today we're going to talk about moving the story forward. So whatever the conflict was that the character was engaged in, specifically your protagonist was engaged in yesterday, today we want to escalate that conflict. We want the initial conflict to get bigger, and we want it to be pulling the protagonist towards an even bigger conflict. For your protagonist, this means that your protagonist's everyday world is no longer stable. The protagonist is no longer in 100% control of his life or her life. It would be great if on day 2 you can find a way to reveal a little bit of the protagonist's hidden life. In day 1, you basically communicated the dominant impressions, like the big strokes picture of your character. But today we want to start getting into revealing a little bit of your character's personality, maybe showing some sides of your character that didn't get shown yesterday. Also, we want to work on increasing sympathy and empathy. And we talked about, if you haven't seen the day 1 video, we talked about how you create sympathy and empathy for your character and the reader. And today we want to make sure that your protagonist takes action. One of the biggest mistakes that writers make when they're writing the opening of a novel is that their protagonist is passive. Kurt Vonnegut was famous for saying that whenever he writes a scene, no matter what else is going on, he makes sure that the main character wants something, even if it's as simple as wanting a glass of water. And I'm paraphrasing, of course. But basically, his point there is that your character should always be trying to do something, even if it's not yet addressing the main problem of the story, even if it's not like the most logical thing for your character to be doing. Maybe your character's in denial, but he still or she should still be trying to do something in the scene. And it should be something that's clearly motivated so that we understand why the protagonist is taking that action. So other characters that you may not have introduced yet, depending on where you're starting your story, the contagonist, and this is like a relatively new term that has been brought over from screenwriting, I believe. The contagonist is usually like an ally or a character. There's not necessarily a secondary character. They may play a primary role in the story, but their main function in the story is to either help or hinder the protagonist, and often they do both. There's someone who maybe has a reason to be with the protagonist and be pursuing the same goal, or be pursuing a slightly different goal, but they're stuck together because their goals both take them in the same direction. And they're often the character that keeps the protagonist honest, that calls the protagonist on his bullshit. Basically the character that's like serving as a foil or a counterpoint to your protagonist and your protagonist's issues. Then there's the antagonist, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Basically, the antagonist is usually the villain in the piece, and it's someone who's working against the main character. If you haven't introduced at least one of these characters yet, it's possible that you won't introduce both until later in the story, but if you can find a way to introduce or even just hint at one or both of these characters at this point in the story, that's a good goal for day 2. Conflict. The main conflict that your protagonist is involved in needs to affect him in a little bit bigger way than it did yesterday. We want to see today the protagonist reacting to that conflict, get a sense of what's going on in the protagonist's head. It's like something changed yesterday. Some sort of conflict basically intruded on the protagonist's everyday world. How's the protagonist feeling about it? We want to, by day 2, to be starting to see the protagonist's reaction. And we also want to increase the sense of movement and direction. And whenever we talk about movement and direction, movement is basically conflict, the character engaging in conflict and trying to get somewhere. And direction, we're usually talking about purpose, the character having a goal. The character is trying to go somewhere. They may fail terribly and end up somewhere else, but at least they're pointed in a particular direction. Setting. How can the main conflict drag the protagonist more deeply into the world that you want your readers to explore? Answering this question is going to tell you how you can incorporate setting into your day 2 scenes. Also, I'd like you to ask yourself, how can the setting make the main conflict worse for the protagonist? A lot of times when we're writing, we tend to focus really heavily on interpersonal conflict, and we forget that just moving through the world itself can sometimes be a conflict. In the same way that maybe you're having a fight with your girlfriend or a disagreement with someone at work, and not only is that stressing you out, also all the little things like the stair that's not nailed down that you have to be careful not to trip over, and the fact that you had to run to catch the bus, and maybe it's raining and you're getting wet. All these little things in your environment impact your effectiveness as you move through the day, and all these little things in the environment should also impact your protagonist as they are dealing with whatever problems are happening in their everyday world right now. And also, I just want to say, if you're writing science fiction or fantasy, there's often going to be something special or unique about the setting. It's going to be something that's different from your reader's everyday world. And if you can find a way to show that or hint at that or explain how that works by having it negatively impact your character or interfere with what your character is doing, even better. We talked about story promise yesterday, and I just want to re-emphasize that this is extremely important. You want to be giving your readers an emotional experience as they read your story from start to finish. You want to be consistent with that, not in the sense of only having one emotion in the story, but you want to tell them at the beginning of the story, hey, this is going to be a comedy, or this is going to be a tragedy, or this is going to be a drama, or this is going to be a story where you are going to absolutely be torn over what happens to the protagonist and whether or not the protagonist is right or the antagonist is right. Whatever kind of story you're telling, you want to keep your opening consistent with that so that the reader expects what they're going to get and they're not disappointed. They don't feel cheated by the time they get to the end of the story. Okay, so getting started. Yesterday we talked about tips for getting started. I would refer you back to the day 1 video if you haven't seen it, because I talked about it in a little more depth. But don't forget to do your pre-writing ritual before you start. Don't forget to maybe do a little bit of a warm-up exercise, like maybe do some free association, do some free writing. It's okay if your warm-up exercise is to just look over your notes, look at your character sheets, and basically refresh your memory so that you've got everything that you're going to be writing about in your head. Your warm-up exercise could be creating a map of the location where today's scene is going to take place. Some people find it helpful to go back and reread what they wrote the day before. Not necessarily the whole thing. It could just be the last few paragraphs, just so that you're back in that same place where you ended it yesterday, especially if you stopped in the middle of a chapter or a scene. One thing I want to caution you against when you're rereading, don't edit. If you let yourself start editing, it's really easy to get sucked into a critical mindset where instead of creating, you got yourself into editing mode by editing yesterday's work, and then all of a sudden you're editing what you're writing today as you write instead of just writing it. And the reason you don't want to get into that editing mindset while you write, you want to separate those two phases when you're doing something like NaNoWriMo and you have to get a certain number of words every day. Because your editing mindset takes so much time. If you are stopping and rewording every sentence as you go, it's going to take you hours and hours to get to your 1,600 words. Just write today. write the whole scene. You're going to have lots of time in December and January to edit your novel. Or even if you want to write your scene and then go back and edit it tonight before you go to bed. Even if you want to do some editing on the same day, please separate your writing session from the editing session and give your creativity a chance to just flow without being stopped by your inner critic. And also I want to say, don't worry if it doesn't feel easier yet. If you haven't been writing consistently before this, and NaNoWriMo is like a big jumping in with 2 feet, it does take you a while to start a writing habit, and it does take a while for you to start for you to get to that point where you just sit down, and as soon as you sit down and open your manuscript, you're in your writing state of mind. You can get there, but it takes time, and it takes a lot more time than a month. So I would say if you sit down and you wrote yesterday, and then today you're like, the words aren't coming, and I've been sitting here for 3 minutes already. Relax, that's totally normal. Do another warm-up exercise. Spend some time just thinking aloud, make a beat outline for the scene, draw a map, just do something to get yourself into the story world and give yourself a chance to be really focused on that for a few minutes so that your brain kind of gets going in a creative mode. After you write, don't forget to celebrate your progress. Give yourself a pat on the back. Do a happy dance. The day one video, we talked about ways to celebrate your progress. Give yourself a little short-term gratification now and feel good about the fact that you're accomplishing something today. You wrote 1,600 words or more. That's more than maybe you wrote last week. It's more than a lot of other people are writing today. It means something. It's a really important achievement, and you should give yourself credit for it. Also, don't forget to prepare for tomorrow. Make tomorrow easier by setting up your workspace and doing whatever pre-writing work you need to do to get your brain thinking about it while you sleep tonight. So thanks for joining me today. I'd like to say tomorrow I'll be doing another video. We'll be talking about other NaNoWriMo resources. I do have some brainstorming worksheets up on my blog, writesmarternotharder.com. Please feel free to download those. There's a progress tracker. I know that there's a progress tracker at nanowrimo.org, and maybe you're perfectly happy keeping that online. But if you like an actual progress tracker that you can just put up on your wall that has your word count every day and shows you exactly where you are in the novel that you can look at when you're offline, you can download that and fill it in. It's a free PDF on my website. Best wishes with your writing today. I hope you have a lot of fun, and hope you hit your word count. If you don't, though, don't panic. You've got 28 more days, and some of them will be better and some of them will be worse. It's inevitable that you'll have the slow days and the days where you write more than you need to. And if you keep at it, they tend to even out. So best wishes, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.